Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the news that London, the giant of financial services in Europe, has been superseded as the centre, at least for the trade in shares, by Amsterdam as a result of Brexit, more specifically as a result of leaving the single market. Who'd have thought leaving the market where half your customers are would cause such trouble? But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So I'll actually be covering a couple of things here. So the trade in shares is just one part of our financial services, and you could argue it's certainly not the biggest chunk, and you could argue that the damage is therefore quite limited. However, it is still damage. And also there's news that means that there's going to be more damage to come if the Bank of England are correct. But share trading first, so particularly as people ask me to talk about this. Essentially, in order for a UK-based financial services operator to provide their financial services to someone in the EU or vice versa, they need to satisfy the EU that their standards or the regulatory framework that they're working within is equivalent to the EU's. The EU would then grant equivalence, and as long as those standards were maintained, equivalence would remain in place and they could carry on trading. Not that it doesn't mean having to follow EU rules as such, not exactly anyway. It's just that there have to be rules in place that are of an equivalent standard. However, Boris Johnson's government have refused to provide details on how they intend to shape our financial sector. So the EU are being cautious. In fact, quite frankly, it's open secret. Everyone knows that Boris Johnson wants to massively deregulate the financial sector so that it can undercut the EU in its own market. Yeah, this ain't happening. Essentially, although temporary equivalence has been granted for a couple of areas, none has been given for trade in shares. So basically, if you are an EU-based operator, you are not allowed to trade in London, basically. So the result of this was that as soon as Brexit hit last month, €6.5 billion, which was £5.7 billion, went south immediately. Or potentially more specifically, went east, because Amsterdam now seems to have snaffled quite a bit of that movement. The Financial Times were reporting that Amsterdam's so basically London lost half of this trade in shares, but Amsterdam's financial centre increased its trade in shares by 4 times, in January as compared to December. Now, I don't know if there's any notable difference between how much you'd expect to cover in trade in shares in December and January. Maybe it skyrockets in January compared to December, but I would guess not. Otherwise, this is the Financial Times. It's a respected financial newspaper. They would have made that clear. The bottom line, however, is that in January, Amsterdam traded more in shares than London. Now, this would have been a ridiculous notion before Brexit. But like I said, this doesn't mean the end of London's dominance in itself. The loss of £5.7 billion is it's not small fry, but set against the £132 billion that the House of Commons Library says that our entire financial services sector contributed to economic outputs. Was that in 2019? I think that was 2019. But we lose 4% here, we lose another few percent there, some more percent somewhere else, and it all adds up. So is this just an unfortunate consequence of Brexit that won't be repeated throughout the industry, or is it more serious? Because even those with their heads screwed on, the ones who weren't denying what Brexit would bring, was saying that Brexit would of course cause London's influence to shrink. Didn't take a lot of foresight to tell that, because we've already seen quite a lot of financial services operators either moving to the EU or at the very least setting up offices in the EU. And of course it would also mean that other EU centres would grow. But the UK financial hub was such a giant that they said it will remain king of the financial jungle in Europe. And the idea for this was not that London wouldn't lose quite a lot. It's just that when it loses trade to other financial centres, I mean, that's the key thing. It's other financial centres, plural. There's Frankfurt, Paris, Dublin, Amsterdam, for example, Brussels. So it's been split among several. So there's no one giant hub in the EU setting itself in opposition to London. So the idea was that the gravity would still remain mostly around London. And I can cope with that thinking. I can absolutely make sense of that thinking because, you know, it can be applied to the general economy. Brexit is incredibly damaging to our economy, but we will still have a large economy after it's done and things have settled down, whenever that is. You know, we'll still have one of the world's largest economies. It won't be as large proportionally, but it'll still be one of the larger ones. The problem with Brexit is not that it will turn us from one of the richest countries into one of the poorest, although it is dropping us down the pecking order. It's that it will mean that we're making nowhere near as much, we're being nowhere near as economically productive as we would have been without Brexit. And of course, the inevitable consequence is that our society will become even more inequitable. The rich will get richer, if anything, at a faster rate, and the poor will get poorer at a similarly rapid rate. But this humiliation for London is as a result of something that will affect the whole financial sector. Because this week, Andrew Bailey, who is the governor of the Bank of England now, he was saying that he thinks the EU are going to cut the UK off from its financial markets. So he thinks, at the moment there's negotiation, because Brexit's all about negotiations, they haven't finished. It's all, they're negotiating equivalence between the UK and the EU at the moment, and we're supposed to be agreeing something by the end of March. Andrew Bailey is of the view that we're not going to get that equivalence granted. Now, Downing Street had this to say, which I'll quote from the BBC News with a little proviso. Despite the fact that we've supplied all the necessary paperwork and are one of the world's most preemptive financial centres with a strong regulatory system, the EU still haven't granted us full equivalence. Now, I want to break that statement down. We've supplied all the necessary paperwork. Yes, but like I said, it's my understanding that that paperwork doesn't give much in the way of assurances that we will be maintaining the single market standards. We've been a little bit cagey about what our plans are for the financial sector. So the paperwork may in theory be in, but it's a bit like Arnold Rimmer's exam paper. It just has "I am a fish" written all over it. It's not really providing the information that's required. Equivalence is the EU saying that the UK standards are equivalent. The rules aren't written exactly the same, but they are of an equivalent standard. Can't do that if you don't say what the standards are going to be. Next bit, one of the world's preemptive financial centres. Now, I'm not entirely sure what they're trying to get at here. Are they saying that our financial centres are good at getting in before others? Because that's usually a term referring to a military strike, which I'm not sure is a great way to convince the EU that it should be engaging with it. I'm going to guess this is a typo in the BBC and that the quote was actually preeminent. But that is me speculating there, but I'm quite sure that preemptive makes no sense. So, if that's what Downing Street meant, again, it's not such a good thing. I don't think it's actually an improvement on preemptive, because the statement would basically be saying, well, the EU shouldn't be hamstringing a massive competitor on its own doorstep. Okay, why exactly? You've got this massive financial giant outside of their single market. They've got their own financial centres inside the single market. Do you not think they should be trying to block off access to that massive one outside? I think that's what they're going to do. Then, with a strong regulatory system. Well, yes and no. The current regulatory system is the EU's. You know, they're happy with that. However, it is transitioning to a completely new regulatory system, one which the government have not made public yet. So we're back to that first problem. Boris Johnson has not told the EU, or indeed anyone as far as I can tell, how our financial sector will be operating in the foreseeable future. So yeah, let's have a little think here. Why wouldn't the EU grant full equivalence to the UK's financial sector when Boris Johnson intends to use it to undercut EU centres within the EU's own market, when EU centres would gain from refusing to grant equivalence to the UK, and when Boris Johnson refused to negotiate a treaty that covered financial services. It's a poser, isn't it? Basically, if the EU don't grant full equivalence, then their own financial centres gain, and they're under no treaty obligation to do anything for ours. Yeah. Now, I don't know all the ins and outs of this, of course. It may well be that the EU have a vested interest in allowing some mutual trade in financial services. Naturally, if they refuse to grant equivalence to us, we would do likewise with them. I'd be surprised if whatever arrangement develops was not a perfect mirror across the Brexit borders. I would think it's very much, we'll grant equivalence in these areas for you, you do the same for us. And that's all there is to it. But the EU is very protectionist. You know, it's what some Brexiteers have attacked the EU for, as if there's any major economy in the world that isn't. You know, at least the EU is creating the largest free trade area in the world, and we have chosen to be outside it. But the EU is a protectionist. I've seen Brexiteers moaning about this since as well. It's like, as if, you know, as if we're suddenly proving that the EU is protectionist. We never denied it. We always said that. They are protectionist. When we were members, they were protecting us. Now we're not. So they're still protecting their members, but those members are not us. So if full equivalence is not granted, and we're supposed to be agreeing something for the end of March, then it can surely come as no surprise. I mean, I've said before, we chose to make ourselves the opponents of the EU. That comes with consequences, and this is one of them. So, you know, this week we're seeing a report of share trading taking a massive hit. London lost literally half of its trade in this area overnight. In a few months, it may well lose much more. If at the end of March they say we're not going to grant you equivalence in lots of these areas, you would think more trade will be lost. Certainly, it looks like the Bank of England, as I say, fear this outcome. But oddly, you know, in his Brexit government-pleasing speech, the governor, Andrew Bailey, he did say that having to adopt the high standards of the EU would be unfair because it would make London a rule taker. Yes, that's what Brexit did to us, Andrew. It was billed as changing us from rule taker to rule maker. It was the exact opposite. In the EU, we made the rules. Now we don't. But if we want to trade, we'll be following those rules. And I don't just mean if we want to trade with the EU. Bear in mind, the EU pretty much sets the gold standard across the world. That's how successful it is as a trading bloc. But anyway, those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.